Let's move out west now. My next topic I got for you here is who's the second best team in the NL West. If you pull up the power rankings right in the middle of the pack there, you see a lot of teams that have disappointed this year. I spotlighted this in the article. You got the Rangers and the Diamondbacks, who were in the World Series. They've dropped off a lot in our rankings. The Twins, the Blue Jays, the Rays, all playoff teams that have fallen off. You have sort of the surprise teams, also the Mariners, I should mention as well in that group. You have the Tigers, the Mets, and the Reds, who have just been sort of better than expected, not good enough to be in the top 10, but they improve by virtue of all these other teams falling off. But when you get to the bottom of our top 20 here, you see the Diamondbacks and the Padres. And then to pull up the next one here, you see the Giants. That was not a mistake. We ranked from 19 to 21, Diamondbacks, Padres, Giants, because honestly, I don't know where to pick any of these teams right now. Ultimately, when it came to kind of the tiebreaker, it was, well, the Diamondbacks were just in the World Series last year. You look at their run differential, their offense is still putting up a lot of runs. I still believe in that team. The Giants and the Padres, they made a lot of changes this offseason. Hasn't really gotten off to the best of starts. So we'll start it here. Who's the second best team in the NLS? Where are you leaning, Patrick?
Despite the win-loss record saying they're the third best in this threesome, I have the Arizona Diamondbacks ahead and as the best team that'll finish second behind the Dodgers, as we know. So I think these rankings are dead on, right? You look at run differential, Diamondbacks are the only ones in the positive. Padres entered Wednesday fairly close, Giants a little bit further back. If you look at Fangraphs projections, Diamondbacks, Giants, Padres is the order there for that. But I'm looking at injuries. That's really what I think the season has been about, right? The first month plus has been about injuries, and the Diamondbacks have had the most. Padres have had virtually none. Giants, most of their sizable ones have been on the pitching side of things, but the Diamondbacks, they got about 9 guys from their opening day roster on the IL. Like, it's just one injury after another to the starting rotation, to their bullpen, to guys that they're expecting in their lineup for 162 games. And they're just getting besieged by these injuries. And yet they are still hanging in there. And they're getting besieged by bees as well. So, I mean, look, you can't ask for a better job for Torey Lovullo to do, despite the fact that, you know, his clubhouse is looking like a MASH unit right now. So I 100%, I think that's it. The Diamondbacks have been doing it, not as well, but again, in this small sample size, they're not that far behind. And I think they've got the most growth. They definitely have the most potential if everyone is healthy and playing their best.
I know this week we assigned an article to one of our writers. I'm actually blanking on who I assigned that to, but someone's doing a dive on Corbin Carroll. And I am curious to see what they come back with as far as the statistical analysis on why he's gone to such a slow start this year. But you would expect he's going to get better. And you look at this rotation, I mean, they've only just started to get a taste of what Jordan Montgomery is going to bring to the table. And when they really get going, I think Fott's going to be better. I think Zach Gallen's been good, but I could even see him being a little bit better than he's been so far. I just believe that this rotation is going to be able to carry them. The Giants are this interesting team to me because if they can hang in there, depending on when they get Robbie Ray back, they do have an interesting group. I just don't know if they have enough offense. And on the other side of the coin for the Padres, I don't know if they have enough pitching, So I think the Diamondbacks are the team to me that just has the most boxes checked off of guys that'll come back, that'll answer some of their concerns so far where they can start to get going. But it's crazy because right now, I mean, you're looking at this playoff race, and I was going through it, when I was doing these rankings, and I think it was, if the season ended today, Phillies were one of the wild card teams. Who was the other one? I know it was Mets and Reds were at the tail end of it. I'm trying to remember who the second wild card would have been, but some of these teams that we expected to be in the thick of the race just haven't gotten going.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at the wild card, like you said, there's one team from the East, one team from the West, and then 2 teams in the Central that are
that's what it is. Yeah,
amongst the best. Yeah, so the
Cubs Brewers were the 2 teams we literally just talked about. I forgot. That's some pretty bad short-term memory for me there.
And Tigers Royals, you've got right in there in the American League. We've been talking a lot about the Central divisions, rightfully so. They've been really solid. And as for the West, outside of the Dodgers, who are worthy of being talked about. The Rockies, not so much. You've got these three teams, as we've been discussing, like who is the best, who's going to, take the next step forward, or kind of right the ship a little bit. The Diamondbacks have a really great mix of veterans and young guys. I think all three of these teams do to a degree, but if you look at the young players on the Diamondbacks, all of whom stepped up in a major way in that run to the World Series last year, that they've got another level to go to. I think Corbin Carroll, doesn't necessarily even need to get to another level, because what we saw was an elite player in 2023. This year, he's just not impacting the ball quite in the same way as he was last year. So again, he just needs to stay as is, and he's still a superstar. So I think the Diamondbacks just really have the most growth, right? And the Giants guys, they got to that clubhouse late. I wrote about that last week. Like, hey, despite the additions, it's not adding up for them just yet, but they're starting to heat up just a little bit. Again, this brand new clubhouse that Bob Melvin, hopefully he learned a couple things about new clubhouses with new guys and new chemistry and new personalities, from San Diego. But that's one of the advantages I would also give to the Diamondbacks. You have Torey Lovullo, who knows this clubhouse well, has had success with this exact clubhouse before, whereas Bomel and Mike Schilt in San Francisco and San Diego, respectively, they're both new to the job.
Yeah, no, that's a huge thing to think about. And while some of those cores are the same, like there's a lot of the same guys in San Diego, there's a lot of the same guys in San Francisco, but they're not coming off a season that left a good taste in their mouth. The Diamondbacks, they can fall back on, hey, we were just in the World Series, and while there is a World Series hangover, and maybe we're seeing that a bit with Arizona, history suggests that the team that loses the World Series typically can have a little more success coming off than the team that won the World Series. So I think the Diamondbacks are going to figure this thing out. They're going to get it together. Has Eduardo Rodriguez even pitched yet? I think he's been hurt, right?
Yeah, he's shut down for a little while. I think I'm not going to say they tried to rush him back, but Torey did say, like, hey, we learned a couple things about this, and that's another aspect, I think, of the debate that we're having here about the second best team in the NL West. I got to cover a lot of the World Series from the Diamondbacks perspective last year, and it was a masterclass in managing. It was just a pleasure to see Torey push the right buttons, sometimes in a more literal sense with his substitutions, and then a figurative sense behind the scenes, kind of working some of these young players and setting them up for success. And I think Torey understands maybe better than the other two that this is going to be a long season. This is going to take all 162 games, similar to how we talked about, this time last week with the Houston Astros, where, all right, they've got an idea. They're not going to be sort of retooling and catching their breath in mid to late September like they've been in years past. It's going to take a grind, and I think that clubhouse is capable of doing that. I think the Diamondbacks are patient enough to be able to grind it out with all of these injuries. Schilt and Bob Melvin, I don't know how much of a luxury they're going to have doing that, again, with a roster that they are not as familiar with.
Yeah, it's, when I think the Diamondbacks can weather the storm a little bit better than these other teams. And particularly I'm looking in San Diego, I'm just wondering, because they have so much talent, right? I mean, you every year we talk ourselves into, well, okay, the Padres just got Dylan Cease and Michael King's going to be great. But something's been wrong there. And I'm looking at the stats for some of these guys, and Xander Bogaerts, a brutal start again for him. Manny Machado has been okay, but certainly not the Machado you'd expect. And the pitching side, I mean, what's happening with Joe Musgrove? He's been brutal, as has Michael King up to this point. So a lot of these guys that we were looking at to start the season are like, all right, these are the guys in San Diego that can carry them, even though it is a very top-heavy roster. They're just not getting the job done. And it's Jurickson Profar who's carrying the team right now offensively. It's a weird collection they got there in San Diego.
Yes, that is never a good sign. No shade to Jurickson, Mr. Relevant, as he is now nicknamed, a guy who was frankly cut, is designated for assignment by the Rockies and then picked up by the Padres there. So, good for him, kind of having a bit of a resurgence. But you're right, not the guy that you were really expecting to carry this offense that's really deep, right? And an offense that needs to protect their young guy in Jackson Merrill, and that really hasn't been the case. So they got to be a little bit kinder to the babies on the roster Yeah, they still can be kind to the babies that they're having, with their significant other, Manny Machado. This is a paternity list reference. But nevertheless, he's back and he needs to really start hitting again and really give this offense a jolt if they are going to make a run at being one of these wild card clubs.
We already kind of established we both like the Diamondbacks as the second best team. So now let's close here. Who's the third best team? Who do you like more? You have to pick one of these two teams right now. Do you believe that the Padres or the Giants have a better chance to even finish the season above 500? Because I think one of these teams is going to be really bad ultimately. One of these teams is going to win like 75 games. That's just kind of how it's going to have to work out in this division. So which one do you believe to maybe be a just missed when it comes to the playoffs and be the third best team in this division?
The team name that almost came out of my mouth first before I bit my tongue and reminded myself that I would never pick the Padres again after picking them to win the division has me answering the Giants are the third best team in the NL West. I can't do that again. I do like the Padres roster, but the only series this year that the Colorado Rockies did not lose was against the Padres. They split with the Padres. In fact, the Rockies needed a 6-run 8th inning on the getaway day on Thursday in order to force a non-series loss, right? So the Padres are struggling that way. And the Giants, I think, have a lot more talent on their roster. And they're in a similar boat to the Dodgers where wait until you get to the second half, deep into the second half, late August, early September, when a lot of their dogs come back. Alex Cobb, Robbie Ray. Maybe by that point, Keaton Winn is injecting himself into the lineup. Do they need to pull back on some innings on Jordan Hicks? Well, now that's a great arm to have in the bullpen. So the Giants have a lot more of those options that you can look at and say, okay, there's going to be an influx of talent in the second half once everybody gets right. The Padres, are they going to be able to do something at the trade deadline? Sure, something, but it can't be anything major because the prospect pool that they've got right now is really barren. So they're not going to get a boost from that. They're going to have to get good by the trade deadline to even justify a small addition. Whereas again, the Giants and the Diamondbacks, I think they can pace themselves a little bit, be more patient, and figure some things out. And they'll have until the end of September to possibly sneak their way into the postseason. Because if the Padres don't get right by the trade deadline, they are going to be that really bad team along with the Rockies in the NL West.
I think you sold me because I also was probably leaning more Padres, but I think you sold me with what you said there. And ultimately, it actually kind of reminded me of a take I had last year with the Padres, which was just, I cannot believe they didn't sell last year. I can't believe I mean, they could have sold the Cy Young. They could have sold the best closer in baseball at the time, and they could have really helped for this season, next season, 2026. And I feel like it was a huge missed opportunity. And now I think they've plagued themselves to be perpetually just caught in the middle, where every year they're going to try to put some lipstick on a pig of a roster and try to figure out a way to get that team to connect and be good enough. And I think there's just something wrong there. So I agree with you. I think the Padres are, and although I think we had them ranked 20 instead of 21, regardless, I think the Padres are the worst of these three.
That's such a great point too.
Yeah.
Just to get to that about the trade deadline too, because this is a conversation I have a lot with people when talking about the Rockies when it comes to giving a guy a qualifying offer and taking a draft pick and saying, well, the prospects that were out there and that were available to us, we don't like as good. Think about it like this: had they traded Soto or Snell earlier or gotten their compensation back sooner, they would have been able to utilize that a lot quicker, right? Because the Snell qualifying offer, they don't have that yet. That's just dangled out there. They're waiting to get that in the draft in July. So that is an asset they can't even trade to try to entice another team to improve their roster and get somebody via a deal. So that's shooting themselves in their own foot at letting an expiring asset. Now, granted, they do draft well, they do develop well, and they do trade from that prospect pool really well. But you have one less asset now because you're waiting for the draft. Whereas had you gotten a prospect, not only could it have possibly impacted your roster right now, but it could have given you a chip a little bit sooner to be a little bit more aggressive and active ahead of the trade deadline, ahead of the draft this summer.
A lot of people give AJ Preller a ton of credit for the second Soto trade, what they got back for his ability to scout, to draft, to develop, and they have done an amazing job replenishing that farm system. But I think it's another article we have in the works at Just Baseball. Look at that trade from the Nationals' perspective right now. CJ Abrams in the middle of a breakout. Mackenzie Gore, a solid piece in that rotation. The Padres could certainly use a Gore in their rotation right now. James Wood near a call-up. That's a trade that is going to look pretty ugly because ultimately, I mean, we'll see. By extension, they have Dylan Cease here for a couple of years from all of this maneuvering. But I would be very surprised if the Padres make out on the better end of all of those Juan Soto transactions.